Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I've been dealing with the same nonsense for months at this point. Every week, sometimes twice a week, someone would walk into the men's bathroom and destroy the handicap stall. We're talking feces smeared all over the walls, the toilet seat, sometimes even flung onto the other stalls. It was disgusting and degrading, but management always sent one of us to clean it up like it was just part of the job. I was lucky. I worked the register, so I never got stuck with bathroom duty. But my co-worker did. He was the kind of guy who didn't take crap from anyone, literally or figuratively. He had a short fuse and a sharp tongue, and when you pushed him too far, you'd regret it. We got along fine. He never gave me problems, and I stayed out of his way when he was in one of his moods. One afternoon, he came in on his day off to grab some food. He ordered, paid, and then headed to the bathroom. I didn't think anything of it. People use the bathroom all the time. But when he came back out a few minutes later, his face was red and his jaw was tight. I could tell something was wrong. He walked over to me and leaned on the counter. He told me I wasn't going to believe what he just saw. I asked him what happened. He said he found the guy, the one who'd been doing it, the one who'd been smearing poop all over the bathroom for months. I blinked at him. I asked if he was serious. He said he was dead serious. He explained that he'd been in there washing his hands when some old dude came out of the handicap stall. He smelled it immediately. After the old guy left, he went back in and sure enough, there was poop smeared everywhere. So he confronted him right there in the bathroom. I asked him what he said to the guy. He told me he asked the old man why he did it. And the old guy just grinned and said he didn't care. He said he just wanted to ruin some poor person's day. My stomach dropped. He told me that he was the one who had to clean it up every single time and he was that poor person. I could see the wheels turning in his head. He didn't say anything else. He just sat down at the table in the corner and waited for his food. I watched him the whole time. He was staring at the old guy who was sitting in a booth across the restaurant eating his meal like nothing had happened. The old guy even had the nerve to look over at the bathroom when another employee went in to clean up the mess. He was grinning. My co-worker saw it too. I could tell because his hands balled into fists on the table, but he didn't move. He just sat there, watching. When the old guy finally left, my co-worker got up and walked out right after him. I didn't see him again until his next shift a few days later. He seemed normal, maybe even a little too normal, like he was planning something. Turns out he was. He told me later what he'd been doing. He followed the old guy home that first day and watched him for over an hour. Then he did it again and again. For 2 weeks straight, he followed the old guy to work, to the restaurant, back home. He learned his schedule, his routine, where he lived, what kind of car he drove. He said it was easy because the old guy never once looked over his shoulder. He had no idea anyone was watching him. Once my co-worker had all the information he needed, he started. The first thing he did was slash one of the old guy's tires in the middle of the night. But he didn't stop there. He opened the spare tire compartment on the back of the old guy's Jeep and poked a small hole in the spare. The next morning, the old guy woke up to a flat tire and no usable spare. My co-worker said he watched from down the street when the old guy freaked out on the phone, yelling about being late for work and not having money for a new tire. The old guy didn't even know how to change a tire. He spent 2 hours in the heat trying to figure it out with someone on the phone, walking him through it. My co-worker was grinning ear to ear when he told me this part. Eventually, the old guy got the spare on and drove to work, but by the afternoon, the spare went flat too. The old guy had to get both tires serviced at a shop nearby. That night, my co-worker went back and slashed 3 more tires. He left one untouched because he'd overheard the old guy on the phone earlier talking to his insurance company. They told him they wouldn't cover the tires unless all 4 were damaged. So my co-worker made sure all 4 were damaged. The old guy didn't come to the restaurant for a month after that, but my co-worker wasn't done. Once the old guy got his tires replaced, my co-worker struck again. This time he poured 1.5 gallons of sugar and bleach into the gas tank. The old guy's Jeep had one of those manual gas covers, so it was easy. The next morning, the old guy started his car and made it halfway to work before the engine gave out. He had to get it towed back home. By this point, the old guy's car was completely unusable. My coworker said he felt satisfied, but he wanted one more thing. He wanted everyone to know who the old guy was and what he'd been doing. He found the old guy's name from one of the phone calls he'd overheard and looked him up on social media. He downloaded a few pictures and made flyers. The flyers had the old guy's face, his name, and a description of what he'd been doing in the bathrooms for months. My coworker printed dozens of them and plastered them all over the restaurant. A few days later, the old guy showed up with a friend. The friend ordered food while the old guy went to the bathroom. One of the other employees saw him and told everyone. We all waited. The old guy came storming out a few minutes later with one of the flyers in his hand. His face was red. He demanded to know who was responsible for the flyers. My coworker stepped forward in his uniform. He said he was the one who made them. The old guy started yelling about lawsuits, slander, emotional damages, all kinds of legal threats. My coworker just stood there with a huge grin on his face. Then he told the old guy that he didn't care. He said he just wanted to ruin some poor person's day. The old guy froze. You could see the exact moment he realized who he was talking to. His eyes went wide and his mouth hung open. The managers came over and banned him from the restaurant on the spot. The old guy threatened to ram his car through the windows. My coworker asked him if his car was a unicycle. He told him he should check his tires. The old guy went pale. He put it all together. He knew my coworker had destroyed his car, but there was no proof. No cameras, no witnesses, nothing. He turned around and left without another word. We never saw him again. I've been working at a regular grocery store bakery for about a year when things got weird. My days started at 4 in the morning prepping pastries before the store opened. The pay was decent, the work was straightforward, and I liked my co-workers well enough. One of them was this kid who just turned 20. He worked as a mixer, which meant he followed recipe sheets and dumped ingredients into industrial mixers all day. Not exactly rocket science, but he was friendly and we got along. We'd talk about different baking techniques while putting away supplies. Nothing fancy, just easy work conversation. Then one morning, this woman walked into our prep area and started handing out business cards. She had a thick Russian accent and got straight to the point. She told us that whatever we were getting paid at our current job, her company would double it if we came to work for them. I figured why not check it out. More money sounded good. When I showed up for the interview, the place was literally under construction. Exposed wiring, plastic sheeting everywhere, the whole deal. The lead baker there seemed cool though. We talked shop for a while and hit it off. He warned me that the big boss had very specific ideas about what he wanted and I'd need to work around that. I told him I could handle it and asked when I could start. They hired both me and the mixer kid. The pay really was double what we'd been making. For the first few months, things were actually fun. The big boss was this burly Russian guy who walked around scowling at everything, but the work itself was interesting. He wanted everything done like those bulk warehouse stores. Mass production, high quality, the works. They were bringing in equipment that must have cost millions. Industrial folders, shapers, injection machines. Stuff I'd only seen in specialty facilities. In the beginning though, we were literally mixing dough in cleaned out trash cans because the equipment hadn't arrived yet. The mixer kid worked on bread dough following spec sheets the lead baker gave him. I spent my time developing new recipes and figuring out production constraints. It was probably the most creative baking work I'd ever done. Then came the incident with the cheesecake. The big boss tasted it and called me sweetie, while saying it was good work. I told him he could call me Miss Ma'am or just use my name. Any of those would work fine. He stared at me like I just insulted his mother. From that day on, I might as well have been invisible. Or worse than invisible, he treated me like dirt on his shoe. Meanwhile, he hired more women, and I watched him hit on every single one of them. Some seemed fine with it. Guess that doubled salary bought a lot of tolerance. The big boss ran the place like a reality show. He'd fire people on the spot for nothing. One day, he fired the lead baker. Just walked up and told him to leave. That left me and the mixer kid to handle all the recipe development. I inherited a pile of notes and half-finished formulas. The mixer kid started acting different. He'd always been friendly, but now he was constantly around the big boss, laughing at his jokes, agreeing with everything he said. It was pretty obvious he saw an opportunity with the lead baker gone. Meanwhile, my relationship with the big boss kept getting worse. I made a batch of cinnamon rolls and asked him to try them. He told me he hated them, and they were terrible. I asked what specifically he didn't like, explaining that I could adjust the dough, the filling, the icing, anything at all. He said he didn't know, just that they were bad. I had a hunch about what was really happening, and I took cinnamon rolls from the exact same batch and gave them to one of the women he liked. Asked her to present them as her own work. She walked over to the big boss and asked him to try the cinnamon rolls she'd made. He told her they were excellent and said it was quality work. Right. One afternoon I noticed my recipe notes had been moved around. A coworker pulled me aside later and told me that the mixer guy had been taking my notes. Apparently he'd been showing them to the big boss and claiming he developed them himself. That explained why he kept asking me basic baking questions. He'd been a mixer his whole career. Following a recipe sheet was one thing. Actually, understanding ratios and formulas was completely different. I started paying more attention, and sure enough, my notes kept getting moved whenever I left the prep area. So I made a second set of notes, decoy recipes. I loaded them with ridiculous amounts of salt, triple the normal yeast, proportions that anyone with actual baking knowledge would immediately recognize as wrong. Left them in an obvious spot where he'd find them. Before I could see if my plan worked, the big boss called a meeting. He sat me down and dropped the news. He told me I wouldn't be working in the bakery anymore and that I'd help with store setup instead. He said the mixer would be the new lead baker and I needed to give him all my notes. I told him sure thing and that I'd get those right over to him. I handed over my decoy notebook. The real recipes stayed locked in my car. The next day I heard screaming from across the warehouse. The big boss was yelling at the mixer kid, asking what he'd done and why there was so much salt. He said the cake tasted like the ocean. I kept my head down and focused on my work. A few days later we were testing the new industrial mixers. Had to make sure they worked properly before the grand opening. The mixer kid decided to test them with a bread recipe. My bread recipe! The one with triple the yeast and sugar? The dough came out wrong, obviously. He had to throw it all away. Hundreds of pounds of dough. And where do you throw away hundreds of pounds of dough? In the middle of summer. The dumpster out back. Here's the thing about bread dough. It doesn't stop rising just because you threw it away. Heat makes it rise faster. We were having a heat wave. You can probably see where this is going. I happened to be walking past the back loading area a few hours later. There was the mixer kid sweating and swearing, trying to shovel this massive blob of dough back into trash bags. The dumpster had basically exploded. Dough everywhere, rising and expanding and oozing out like something from a horror movie. Best day of work I'd ever had. But things were getting stranger around that place. The big boss had armed security guards everywhere. This was a grocery store. Why did we need armed guards? They were also ordering duplicate equipment for everything. 2 of every industrial mixer, 2 of every oven, 2 of everything. All stored in the back with nowhere to put it. I looked up the parent company out of curiosity. The address listed was in Russia. When I tried to verify it, the address didn't exist. The big boss also kept having closed-door meetings with guys in expensive suits who definitely weren't grocery suppliers. I started job hunting immediately, found something within a few weeks. Right before I could give notice, the big boss fired me, told me I wasn't a good fit for his vision. I pretended to be disappointed, shook his hand, and walked out trying not to smile. They had their grand opening a month later. Big fanfare. Advertisements everywhere. They lasted exactly 3 months before the whole place shut down. Just closed up overnight. Equipment disappeared. Big boss vanished. The building sat empty. The mixer kid lost his job when they closed. Apparently being lead baker of a money laundering front doesn't look great on a resume. I grew up as the protective older brother, the one who made sure nobody messed with my little brother at school, who taught him how to ride a bike, who was there when he scraped his knee. That was my role and I was good at it. Then 6 years ago, everything flipped upside down. One moment I was driving home from work, the next I was waking up in a hospital bed being told I'd never walk again, paralyzed from the waist down. Those words didn't feel real at first. I kept thinking I'd wake up from whatever nightmare this was. But it wasn't a nightmare. It was my new reality. The first few months were hell, learning how to do everything again from a wheelchair, watching people's eyes flicker with pity when they saw me, feeling like I'd lost a huge part of who I was. But I refused to give up. I worked with physical therapists, learned to adapt, pushed myself to regain as much independence as possible. My family and friends rallied around me, especially my brother. The irony wasn't lost on me. The kid I used to protect now spent half his time making sure I was okay. He never made a big deal about it, never treated me like I was fragile. He just showed up, helped when I needed it, had my back the same way I'd always had his. By the time his son turned 4, I got him pretty good at navigating the world from my wheelchair. Sure, there were challenges, but I didn't let them stop me from living my life. That's why when my brother invited me to the aquarium with him, his wife, and my nephew on a scorching summer day, I said yes immediately. My nephew was obsessed with fish and had been talking about this trip for weeks. The place was absolutely packed when we arrived. Families everywhere, kids running around, everyone trying to escape the heat. The crowds made it tough for me to see much of anything. Being at eye level with everyone's waists meant I missed a lot of the exhibits mounted higher up. We were trying to get a view of the shark tank when this woman and her 2 kids started shoving their way through the crowd. They weren't politely asking people to move or waiting their turn. They were just pushing through like everyone else was invisible. Her kids were completely out of control, running around, bumping into people, knocking into display stands. The woman didn't say a word to them, actually seemed amused by the chaos they were causing. When they reached our group, the woman tried to push right in front of my wheelchair, completely blocking my view. I asked her to give me a little space because I couldn't see past her. The woman whipped around and looked at me. She snapped back that she had just as much right to see the exhibits as I did. I told her I wasn't saying she didn't, just asking if she could avoid blocking my view, since I was already at a disadvantage. She accused me of playing the victim card and said it was real classy. My brother stepped forward and put his hand on my shoulder. He told her there was no need for that kind of attitude, and that I'd just asked nicely for a little consideration. She brushed him off and told her kids to come on, but she didn't actually move. Her kids continued running around wildly while she stood right where she was, with her arms crossed, making a point of staying put. That's when a staff member noticed the commotion and walked over. He told the woman he was going to have to ask her to calm down and respect the needs of everyone there, especially those who might need a little extra consideration. The woman asked what he was talking about and insisted she was just trying to enjoy the aquarium with her kids. The staff member said he understood but that she needed to be aware of others around her. He also pointed out that her children were running around and disturbing other guests, which wasn't acceptable behavior. She shot back that they were just being kids and asked if he expected them to stand still like robots. The staff member said no, but he did expect them to follow the rules and not disrupt other people's experience. He added that as their parent, she needed to make sure they did. The woman told him he couldn't tell her how to raise her children. The staff member replied that if she couldn't control her children and show respect for other guests, he'd have to ask her to leave. That's when she lost it. She yelled that he couldn't kick her out because she'd paid to be there. She demanded to speak to his manager right away. The staff member radioed for the manager while the woman continued yelling. People were staring now. My nephew pressed closer to his dad, clearly uncomfortable with all the screaming. When the manager arrived, the woman really went off. She said finally, someone with authority had shown up. She wanted to file a complaint about the staff and about me, the lazy guy over there in the wheelchair. She pointed right at me and went on about how I was getting all this special treatment just because I was in a wheelchair. She said next time she came there, she was going to rent a wheelchair herself so she could be treated like a little princess too. The manager's face hardened. He told her that was completely inappropriate and that the staff was simply trying to ensure everyone had a good experience. He said if she couldn't respect the other guests, He was going to have to ask her to leave. She shouted that she wasn't going anywhere. The manager signaled to security. That's when my nephew, who'd been quiet this whole time, suddenly stepped forward. He yelled at her to stop yelling at his uncle and called her mean. Everyone went quiet. This tiny 4-year-old kid staring down this grown woman who'd been causing chaos for the past 10 minutes. She asked what he'd just said to her and called him a little brat. She took a step toward him and I saw something snap in her eyes. She said someone needed to teach him some manners and lunged forward at him. But my brother was faster. He grabbed her arm and stopped her cold. He told her to touch his son and see what happens. Then he shoved her back hard. She stumbled and fell on her rear. Look, I know violence isn't the answer. I know my brother probably shouldn't have done that, especially in front of his kid, but when you see someone coming at your 4-year-old child with violence in their eyes, instinct takes over. I can't judge him for protecting his son and his brother from someone who was clearly out of control. Security rushed over. The police were called. The woman was arrested and charged with assault and disturbing the peace. When they led her away in handcuffs, she was still screaming about how unfair it all was. My nephew watched her go with this fierce look on his face. This little warrior who'd stood up for me without hesitation. A year passed. Life went back to normal. My nephew started kindergarten and was thriving, making friends, learning to read, being a regular kid. Then I got a call from my brother. His voice was shaking. That woman had shown up at my nephew's kindergarten. She tried to convince his teacher she was his aunt and was there to pick him up. My nephew recognized her immediately, started yelling for help and hid behind his teacher, who called the police right away. The woman tried to run but didn't get far. She was arrested again, this time for attempted kidnapping and impersonation. When the police questioned her, she completely broke down. She was screaming about how my nephew had ruined her life, how because of that incident at the aquarium, she'd lost custody of her own children in a divorce battle, how she blamed him for everything and wanted to take him away from his parents the way her kids had been taken from her. Hearing that gave me chills. This woman had been so consumed by anger and blame that she'd actually tried to kidnap a child, a 5-year-old kid who'd simply defended someone he loved. She's locked up now, will be for a long time. It's strange how one encounter can spiral into something so much bigger, how a bad day at an aquarium can lead to someone throwing away their freedom and any chance at seeing their own kids again. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.